Hi folks, looking at a muddy Leicestershire countryside in the middle of England, and on this walk with a difference we're going to look at the site of an infamous murder case in the UK, a Roman road, a medieval village and a World War II airfield, all within a couple of miles of each other. And if you're one of our friends from over the big Atlantic, then the story features the 82nd Airborne, the American 82nd Airborne. Now this gate is the site, it's not the original gate. The original gate was wooden, but it's been replaced over the years with this metal gate. But in July 1919, lying next to this gate was a young lady called Annie Bella Wright, and she was found lying next to a bicycle and she'd been shot. And this case becomes known as the Green Bicycle Murder Mystery. Now, I'm not going to detail that here. I've actually, on my channel, there's two fairly long videos explaining what happened and the aftermath of her being found here, lying dead. She'd been shot. So if you're interested in that story, then you can just look up on the channel, the Green Bicycle Murder Mystery. There's a part 1 and a part 2. They're a bit on the long side, but they do try to go into a lot of detail about how she happened to be found here in July 1919. Now, the road that runs along here is now called the Gartree Road. It's actually part of an old Roman road that ran from Colchester, which is in the southeast of the country of England, up to Chester in the northwest of the country. And the original name was, I think, Via Divana. Divana was the Latin name for Chester, so it was literally the road to Chester. That's quite a long distance, and part of that is now goes across fields and totally disused, or there's parts you can walk on near here across the fields, and then parts are still used as a public highway, such as this section here. Now we're coming up to the signpost where it will say Little Stretton, and after Bella had been found next to that gate, her body was taken to Little Stretton, where she was examined by the local doctor. A police constable had come over, PC Hall from nearby Great Glen, and thus was now in the evening. Her body was found in some 9:30 time in the evening, and it was the next day that the PC Hall, who had been a veteran from the Great War, realised she'd been shot, because originally they thought it was just a biking accident, and he started the look to find out what had actually happened here. So we can see Little Stretton only, and then there's Great Stretton we're going to be going to, and then there's Staunton a little bit further on. But before we get to Staunton, there's the airfield we'll be looking at, which was built during the Second World War. So if you're interested in Bella Wright's tragic story, then look at the Green Bicycle Murder Mystery. So that's Main Street. I don't go down there on this walk. There's what was a chapel and is now used as a community centre down there, where she was taken on the evening in July 1919. It's a pretty quiet stretch of the Leicestershire countryside. Now we've moved along the Gartree Road again a little bit further, and we come to what's called Great Stretton. But actually there's less housing in Great Stretton now than there is Little Stretton, which might seem surprising. This is probably the only property there. But originally there was a much larger community here. And there is a church here, St Giles, that stretches back to the Middle Ages. It's now derelict, and it's no longer used. It's been boarded up, and you can't actually get in the church because it's obviously not safe. But it dates back to the Middle Ages. I don't have the actual date on this when it was constructed. And around it is a lost village of Great Stretton, or Stretton Magna, I think is the other name. And you can see when we just walk along here the sort of bumps and the humps of where property was. I think there's an old moat here, a couple of fish ponds. Again, I'm not sure when it became the Lost Village. I've read that it could have been during the period when we had what was known as the Black Death. That was a bubonic plague that originated in China, carried by rats, all the fleas on rats, black rats, across Europe, and eventually came to the UK and killed a high proportion of the population at the time. Or it could just be economic situations sometimes that forced villages to disappear and communities to disappear. So as we come up to St Giles, we can see there's the fence, so you can't go in that. There is a little graveyard in there. I think it's only in the last perhaps 20 years that it's become disused, and I think up to that time it was being used on a fairly regular basis. But obviously they don't seem to have the funds to reconstruct it. So this Stretton Magna, when we walk around, was quite a big area. That's why it became Great Stretton and bigger than the Little Stretton. But today, there's only a couple of actual houses left. The lady at the farm many, many years ago told me how during the Second World War, the American military police would come down from the airfield we're going to visit with our Alsatian guard dogs, and they'd be chasing their chickens, which she wasn't too happy about. Taking the guard dogs out for exercise after our livestock. And we'll go on to visit the airfield shortly. So again, all this area would have been at one time a community which has just disappeared in the ages of time. And as I say, I'm not sure why that happened, why that community disappeared. It could have been due to a plague or disease like the Black Death, or it could have been due to sort of economic activity moving away for whatever reason. And as we can see, there's a hedge there that prevents you going into the churchyard or into the church area. Now, just probably half a mile down the road from this, in a moment, we'll be seeing the airfield. This airfield, it was constructed in 1942 and it opened up in 1943. And there's the old control tower, watchtower, still in use. It's now, it was called RAF Leicester East when it was constructed, and now it's home to the Leicestershire Flying Club, and also there's a helicopter flying club here and other business activities. Originally, when it opened in 1943, it was the short Stirling British bomber was being based here, I think dropping supplies to people like the Resistance Group and the SOE. But then later, it was used for training Dakota tug pilots for the gliders used during the Second World War, and the American 82nd Airborne. Now, I don't think they actually took off from this airfield for any of their operations in Normandy or Operation Market Garden, the Bridge Too Far story. But General Eisenhower did come here in August 1944 to review the troops. I think there was 12,000 troops. and he did a review of the troops. Somewhere over here, that's the Perry track, and he was based somewhere over there from the photographs. And apparently there was 12,000 people here listening to him, and he thanked them for their service in, of course, D-Day had come and gone and the battles in Normandy are ongoing, and he thanked them for their service in D-Day, etc. And they hoped or thought they might be then being sent home, but he then said words to the effect that they'd done a great job, but that he expected more of them, of which there was either a big moan or a big thunder as all the helmets crashed to the ground. Now we're looking at an old original wartime hangar still being used, a T2 I think they're called, but there's now lots of other private hangars being added on over the years. I used to be a member here many years ago, and I used to help man the fire and rescue crash trucks at the time, and the hangar doors to open on your own was quite a big job. They've actually cut them in half now, so they've got smaller spaces, but the main hangar door, you could open it, you put all your weight behind it, and really slowly move it, but in the winter time with ice on the runners it was quite difficult. Bit of a story linked to that, a ghost type story, and there's a couple of ghost stories up here in this airfield. I'll perhaps tell you another one, but some of the guys were working there late at night on the home-built plane, and they had the hangar door open, and when they went there, it was still all locked up, which was a bit spooky at the time. So that's the original aircraft hangar. As I said, they had different types of aircraft here, short Stirling British bombers, then later Dakotas and training units, basically, to train the pilots to tow gliders. And then it was decommissioned after the war. I think stood empty for quite a while, and then the Leicestershire Aero Club took it over, and they're very active today. Here we can see one of their training flights coming in with the Cessnas. But there's a lot, and I haven't been up here for many, many, many years, but what had changed a lot was all the new buildings and new hangars and private hangars, and also the helicopter flying that we'll probably see. So it's obviously a very active small airfield. There's no main commercial flights as such, with airliners going out of here. It's all private flying with single and twin engined aircraft. But it's good that it's survived. Now, here's a plaque because apart from General Eisenhower, on the same day was General Matthew Ridgway in August 44, and then he came back to visit the Club Luck in 1976. Now we have some photos here. So we have, I think there's some photos of Ike reviewing the troops in 44. These are all now in the clubhouse, in the control tower we saw, which we'll just be looking at. So that's him reviewing the troops there in August 1944. And then there's some more pictures of the types of aircraft being used. There's a Stirling bomber, which was not a very successful British aircraft for various reasons. So it reverted from being a main bombing aircraft during the bombing offences, when that was taken over by the Lancaster and the Halifax, to more things like drop-in supplies to the resistance groups, etc. So just views of the various aircraft at the time, as it was called then Leicester East, and it's now called Leicester Airport. It was called Stoughton Airfield for a while. And here, there's an interesting picture. That's actually the Luftwaffe from the Second War aerial photo of Leicester East, obviously doing their reconnaissance of the airfield. And it was constructed in 1942 and commissioned in 1943. It's when it started operations. And we're just looking out over the the main runway and the Perry track here, there in the main runway is a bit further off. Just an interesting story going back in time when I was a member here. One night it was really massively foggy, one of the type of fogs you can't see your hand in front of your face. And one of the flying instructors, who later became a commercial airline pilot, so he wasn't, very nervous due to flights of fancy type guy, came up on his bike, and because the airfield was closed down, of course, because of the fog, he cycled up and came across the main runway. And as he crossed the main runway, another figure on a bicycle suddenly appeared out the fog in front of him, and in a few seconds had disappeared into the fog again. So that was interesting. I mentioned the green bicycle murder mystery earlier, Bella Wright. Well, part of the route she would have taken in 1919 crossed the area which was then where the airfield now is, which was then 1942 constructed. Part of that road left. So was it anything to do with Bella, or was it a mysterious airman from the Second World War? Who knows? Again, there's a closer picture now of the hangar, and as I said, they've actually cut the main doors in half now compared to the main size they were. So anybody who knows about aviation, I understand that's called a T2. That's quite obviously a rare type building these days, because after the Second World War, of course, although lots of airfields have been built, particularly in the east of England, in Lincolnshire, for the bomber offensive, most of them then reverted back to farmland that they had been before they turned into airfields. So there's some still that are like this airfield, still operational in terms of flying clubs, etc. So many men of the 82nd Airborne, who unfortunately never returned home, would have visited here. And we're going to actually visit one of the parks in Leicester, because they were based in a number of parks in Leicester, and there's a nice memorial to them on one of the parks, so we'll take a look at that. And we got a chopper training over there. It's a good day for flying when I was up there, because you can see there's no wind, or hardly any wind. I was actually in the club myself one night, and I definitely heard the sound of people coming in, which I'm sure was ghosts. Anyway, but now we're into what's called Victoria Park in the city of Leicester. That was the memorial to the First World War casualties, and that's the university. Victoria Park, named after Queen Victoria, of course. I think it opened in the late 1880s. Now, on another part, which is not very far away, called Brunston, for sure, many of the 82nd Airborne were based there, and their headquarters, while they were in this part of England, was there, which is now a hotel. And they were there in sort of corrugated huts or even tents, I think. I'm not sure if they were actually on this park as well. I presume they were, because they've placed a memorial here on the park. So it must mean that many of the 82nd Airborne troops were actually also based here. Today it's just an open, free, recreational park. As you can see, the football posts, golf posts, there's tennis nets there. And the day I visited, some of the local schools were using it for their cross-country running competitions. So they were running around, the youngsters were running around the edge of the park on the tarmac path. And that's them in the distance. Different age groups, and all from local schools that obviously come to this day to do a bit of competition, cross-country running. my generation, I seem to think we only went cross-country running when it was snowing. That might not be that true. Okay, so this is in the corner of the park, and here's the tribute to the men of the 82nd Airborne. And it says, they came in freedom, they fought with gallantry, many never to return to their homeland. And that's something we should all remember, I believe. And I just wondered when I was standing here today, and it's nice to see that they've actually put this memorial stone here, that I wonder how many people on this park today, at any age, from the youngsters to people of my generation, actually know that and actually remember that. Because I think we should. Because, as it said, many young men left their homes in America to help free Europe, and unfortunately never returned home, to the loss of themselves and obviously their loved ones, affected their lives forever. So that's a nice memorial to them in Victoria Park in Leicester in England. Chilly day when I was here, and there we can see them getting lined up for their run around the park. And they have their freedoms to thank for men like the guys from the 82nd Airborne.